Hi guys, welcome to another Flight Deck 2 Sim tutorial, and today's video we're going to look at something completely new, and that's X-Plane 11 and the excellent ZIBO mod for the default 737. Now it's something a lot of people have asked for me to do. I downloaded and installed X-Plane 11 a few weeks ago. I've been practicing it, I've been using this excellent freeware mod which you can find the link for in the video description below. And it's a really good rendition of the real aircraft, certainly realistic enough to show you how to operate it using my company's operating procedures. And what we're going to do today is a quick test flight using X-Plane 11, doing a short sector within the United Kingdom. So we're currently in Liverpool. We're going to do a short flight northbound to Glasgow using live time and live weather. And as you can see outside, it's a bit of a typical British winter's morning. The current real live weather conditions, where you can see here, there's quite a brisk southerly wind, 180 at 18 knots. And you can see the windsock straight ahead, the wind pointing straight towards us there. Visibility is around 9 kilometers, light rain showers, a few scattered and broken clouds. It's 5 degrees with a QNH of 1005. Now the routing today is going to take us northeast initially from Liverpool towards the Pottle Hill VOR, and then we're going to go northwest bound, overflying Carlisle on the way to Glasgow. Flight times around 35 to 45 minutes, basing on the weather and traffic. In reality, that's how long it would take in real life. Now, the departure we're going to do, we'll talk about in a second. I'll just show you where we're parked. Currently on stand 40. We'll push back, hopefully, to face southbound, and then I'll make a right turn onto Whiskey and enter the Alpha Taxiway, and then we'll taxi to holding point Alpha 1 for runway 27. And the departure I'm going to fly is the Pole 4 Tango for runway 27, which is currently selected in the FMC. So what we'll do, been setting this all up accordingly, getting used to the buttons here. We'll go to plan, and we'll have a look at this SID. So you can see on the right hand side there's the chart there. Now the Pole 4 Tango says we'll climb on 267 to 1.5 miles off the ILS and then make a right turn heading 019. We'll intercept the radial 242 or 062 inbound to Pole Hill, climbing to 4,000 feet. Well, if I go to the legs page, you can see what it's done. It's generated a waypoint here, the Bravo point. That's the 1.5 miles. And then usually with the real aircraft, you get an intercept course heading, and it's giving me 008 here. Now, I want to fly 019 because the chart says that. So when we get to this waypoint here, we'll disengage LNAV, select heading select, fly the heading of 019. We'll extend the centerline or the 242 radial, and then use LNAV to intercept it manually. And you can see there the stop altitude of 4,000 feet is set there. If you look here on the MCP, oh, there you go. Just need to set that twice there. Once on the MCP, you can see, as I said, it's in the stop altitude too. Now the frequencies for raw data are all set up as well for the SID. You can see we have the ILS tuned. It is 11175 India Lima Quebec for the 1.5 mile, and then we have the Pole Hill VOR tuned as well. And this is for raw data backup in case we lose the FMC. So you can see there 112.1 is now set. So the last thing I want to show you is the takeoff performance. So our current gross weight is 62 tons. We've got 5 tons on board for this sector. And again, if we go to this view here, and I'll bring up the Boeing OPT app, you can see here for Liverpool, using the Gulf intersection for runway 27, all the external wind conditions are set as well, and the weather. Now with this strong crosswind, we can't actually take an assumed temperature reduction, so we have to take a full D rate of 22k. That's the least amount of thrust we can take. And actually, you can see here, it very nicely matches what the ZIBO mod performance calculation says as well. So you can see here 62 tons, M1 limit, full 22k. It says 90.1, we've got 90.2 on the OPT. And the V speeds for wet speed, you can see I've selected it here on page 2 of the takeoff reference page. It exactly, or is it within 1 knot of the Boeing OPT app, just like in real life. So all those speeds are selected. V2 is 143 knots, so we'll just set that up there as well. And that's it. That's the entire briefing really for departure. Next thing we'll look at is the push and start clearance. Okay, so we'll imagine we've got the push and start clearance off stand 40. So what we need to do now is put the transponder to out off on the overhead panel, pop the packs to off, and the anti-collision light is on, and we just verify the parking brake is set. And there we go, we're now fully configured, ready for the push and start clearance.
Here we go.
Okay, so now the push is underway. We'll start engine number 2. So start switch to ground. Monitoring the N2 rotation. I'm just monitoring the pushback as well. Hopefully we'll stop at some point on the taxiway and not go into the back of the terminal.
Okay, give me a second to clear.
Okay, we will do, sweetheart. Right, looks like she's off on her way anyway. So N2 rotation, we have N1 rotation. All pressures increasing. I'm just waiting for 25% N2. There we go. Let's put some fuel in. Very good. And this is what I've found with X-Plane 11. It just sounds a lot more immersive, a lot more realistic and true to the real aircraft. That sounds good. Alright, starter cutout, monitor engine number 2. We've got 20% roughly on N1, around 400 degrees to 500 degrees on the EGT, around 60% N2. Fuel flow's good. And the start lever's in idle detent. Better put the parking brake to set as the pushback's complete. And now let's start engine number 1. Okay, looks like number 1 and 2 is stable. Now we can do the before taxi checklist. The ground crew are clear and they've shown me the bypass bit. So let's pop the generators on. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the ZIBO mod, if you've got the parking brake set, the ground power is always available. APU can go off. Start switches to continuous. I'll actually put the wipers on intermittent as it's raining a little bit outside. Probes to on. We'll need the engine and wing anti-ice on for departure as the TAT is below 10 degrees in the static air temperature. Packs to auto, isolation valve to auto, APU bleed off. And now we can push recall and set the flaps. Flap 5 for takeoff. Now we just do a flight control check. So we have full forward, full aft, full left, centre, full right, centre, checking the rudders. Full left, centre and full right centre. We'll check the hydraulics, actually might as well do that quickly. The secondary engine parameters, really important that you blank the lower DU, because if you have an engine failure or a secondary engine indication in exceedance, this will pop up, so it's a really nice feature to have, so it's worthwhile turning off for that reason. Cool, at that point then call for the before taxi checklist. We'll imagine that's complete, and now we'll commence taxi. So if you remember the taxi routing, we'll make a right turn onto Whiskey, a left turn, exit via Alpha, another left turn, and then we'll taxi to holding point runway 27. So release the parking brake, we'll get rid of this control column, it's a bit in the way, do a quick config check. There we go, no configuration warning horn, no more than about 40%, and then we'll just make a little right turn here. Okay, so now we're on the Alpha Taxiway, we can do the before takeoff checklist. So config was checked, flaps we have 5 green light, stab trim 6.7 units set for takeoff, and now it's just the captain's takeoff briefing. So let's look in the overhead panel briefly. Pax auto bleeds on, we have the V speed set for takeoff, 128, 136 and 143 set on the MCP. The departure is going to be a pole 4 Tango, climb straight ahead to a distance of 1.5 miles off the ILS, right turn heading 019 degrees, and then we'll intercept a 242 radial inbound to Pole Hill, and stopping the climb at altitude 4,000 feet, which is set twice, and that's reviewed, and the cabin, we'll imagine, is secure for takeoff, so the before takeoff checklist is now complete to the line. Okay, so we're now at holding point Alpha 1 for runway 27, and we'll now imagine we've been cleared for takeoff for runway 27, and the latest surface wind in Liverpool, the surface wind is 180 at 20 knots, so we've got a 20 knot crosswind to deal with. We'll see how we get on with the ZIBO mod. Anyway, we've been cleared, we'll pop all the lights on, strobes and steady, and go water throttle LNAV initially. and transponder to TARA, select the weather radar on. So the MTP is set, transponders to TARA, strobe lights are on, and the landing lights are on. We have been cleared for takeoff. So we'll enter the runway now. We'll put the wipers to low to keep them going for the takeoff, and would usually turn the wipers on as soon as we get the gear up, because it's just me. I'll do it at some point during the after takeoff checks. So remember, this is not a single pilot aircraft. Okay, so lining up. I love the realistic squeaking sounds. That's true to the real aircraft, and it's really annoying. Good. Alright, here's runway 27. So a little break. Lining up now. I'm having to add a little bit more thrust than usual, just because of the limitations of X-Plane 11 and the nose wheel movements. There we go. Bring the heading up 267. Okie dokie, there we go. So a little bit off the centre line, but we'll sort it out. Okay, so let's get going. Now in the top right hand corner you can just about see the windsock there. The windsock's coming in from the left. That means I'm going to have to use right rudder during the takeoff roll to maintain centre line. A little bit of aileron into wind, so left aileron. Now in reality you'd have to be quite careful with these inputs. You don't want the spoilers to deploy, but you must use whatever aileron you need to keep the wings level. Anyway, let's give it a shot. So we have the heading of 267, the track's 267. We'll start the timer. Set the thruster around 40%. There the aircraft start moving. Okay, that's stabilised. Let's push toga. Set takeoff thrust. Light forward pressure on the control column. Takeoff thrust set and indications normal. Now you can see the nose is starting to go to the left because of the crosswind. So there's a little bit of right rudder just to maintain the centre line here. Good. That's checked. Release the light forward pressure. A little bit more right rudder now required to maintain the centre line. Here comes V1. And rotates. So now left aileron to keep the wings level during the rotation, and then we let the wind drift us as we get airborne. Good, positive rates, gear up onto the flight directives, but don't ever pitch above 20 degrees, even if the flight directors command it. That's the maximum we wanted to pitch to. 400 feet, verify the roll mode, which is LNAV. Get ready to engage the autopilot. There we go. Command A, and now we'll bug up. And we can turn the wipers off now we're airborne, so they can go to park. And retracts. And taxi lights. That's what we do. So above the flap 5 speed, so flap 1. There's the aircraft turning at 1.5 miles, and then flaps up. And if you remember what I said in the briefing, would manually fly in heading select 019 degrees as per the SID. So we'll go heading select now, and we'll put a heading of 019. Good, so flaps up, no lights. We'll go vertical speed, so just to reduce the rate of climb so we don't get any nuisance TCAS TAs or RAs. Approaching 1 to go, so we can now select 1,000 feet per minute. And just verify the QNH is set correctly. And we're climbing to the stop altitude of 4,000 feet. We'll now do the after takeoff checklist. So gear to up and off. With the ZIBO mod, I think it automatically moves the auto brake to off. Certainly didn't do that. And air conditioning and pressurization 1.0 psi. Switches looks good, duct pressure's good, temperatures are good. So that's set. We leave the start switches continuous, so we've got the engine anti-ice on as we're in visible moisture and cloud. Gear up and off, and the auto brake off, and then we'll just do an altimetry cross check. QNH of 1005, passing 3,500 for altitude 4,000 feet. And we can say the after takeoff checklist is complete. Now, let's have a look on the departure so far. So we're on this heading of 019, and we need to intercept this 242 radial inbound to Pole Hill. So you can see there's the radial represented by this magenta line. So how are we going to do that? What I'm going to do is go to the legs page. We'll bring this 242 radial and Zulu point for the stop altitude 26 miles before Pole Hill. We'll put the inbound course, which is 062. Execute. And now we can engage LNAV, and the aircraft will intercept that magenta line inbound on the 242 radial, and we'll just maintain 4,000 feet until we've been cleared higher. Okay, so now we're inbound to Pole Hill. We can activate the VOR on 112.1, and you'll see there we now have the VOR and we're inbound there. For raw data, if we lose the FMC, we can just simply select Vorlock and fly the radial now. And we'll imagine that we're being cleared to a higher flight level. Imagine we're being cleared to flight level 160. So that is now set. So we can select VNAV. We'll push out into vent here, which will delete the altitude restriction. N1 will engage. We can now climb at 250 knots, and don't forget when you're being cleared to flight level to set standard, and then we're passing 42 for flight level 160. Alright, so we've just cleared the top of cloud here, so we no longer need the engine anti-ice, so we'll pop that off now. Start switches and go to off. When it says auto here, it will be off for the real aircraft. And we're approaching flight level 100, and this is the point at which we do the pre-cruise check. So you can see now the FMC's bugged the econ climb speed of 270 knots. And we'll do those checks now. So we'll go to the overhead panel. All the forward-facing lights can now go off. APU just verifies off. Pressurization, we have 3.0 psi on the differential pressure, and all the switches looking good. Slight split in the duct pressure, that's normal. That is all set correctly. We'll then push recall, and then we'd release the passengers as well. Oops, that should be on normal there, must have accidentally knocked it. Yeah, we can release the passengers now if there's no turbulence. And that's it, pre-cruise checks are complete. Well, imagine we've contacted Scottish Radar now, and they've cleared us to our final cruise level, which is flight level 240, which is now set. So 240 we have set once up here, once on the overhead panel, and once in the FMC as well. Flight level 240 set 3 times. Excellent. Now, one more thing I want to do to kind of make this a little bit more realistic. It'd be unlikely you'd actually complete the departure. You'd probably get vectored to the north. But we'll imagine we've got a decent shortcut from Scottish Radar. It's a little bit quieter. And they've cleared us direct to Ribble. So all I've done is line select key that to 1 left. Verify that's correct. Push execute, and the aircraft will now turn in LNAV to Ribble, the waypoint there. So, I'll continue the climb to flight level 240, there's not much more left to do. I'll then set up for the ILS approach into Glasgow, expecting ILS runway 23, and then once I've done that, you can join me as I'll brief you for the approach into Glasgow. Okay, so I've just reached top of climb, and I've just finished setting up for the ILS into Glasgow, so all I'm going to do now is give you a full approach briefing. Now, looking at the weather, using live weather, would be my luck, but it's quite a gnarly day down there. Very brisk southwesterly wind at 250, 18 gusting 28 knots. Got a high cloud base, and the QNH is quite low at 1000 hectopascals, and the temperature's at 8 degrees. So just be my luck, of course, to have to deal with a very strong crosswind today as we go into Glasgow. But we'll see how we get on. If I have to go around, we'll go around. Now, let's show you the rest of the things I've put in the FMC. Oh, that was got a TA there. Oh, fair enough. Well, traffic would be a TA, clear of conflict would be after an RA, but I think it's to do with this traffic here. Hopefully that won't become a factor. We'll see what we get on. Anyway, the descent page, we've got 250 below 100 knots. Forecast winds are in, QNH of 1000. Now, fixed rings aren't yet implemented with the ZIBO mod. It's something I really hope we get soon. It really increases your situation awareness on the approach. Now, if you look on the left-hand side, you can see the arrival we're expecting today, and that's the LANAK 2 Alpha. So if I go to legs page, select plan, we'll step through this together to show you what we can expect. Now, the first restriction we can see is an ASLIP, max flight level 260. Well, we're already cruising at 240, so that's not a factor. Then we're routing direct to EGPF, ODG, and ODG maximum flight level 200 or below. Now, Papa Foxtrot Sierra 30 is a speed limit point. We must be doing no more than 250 knots at this point, and then we arrive at the final approach point, which is LANAK for the start, and that's to be at flight level 70. If we've not been cleared by that point, we must enter the hold there, but typically just before we get to LANAK, in reality, you'd get radar vectored for the ILS approach runway 23. And what I'm going to do today, because it's just me on my own in a desktop simulator, I'm just going to self-vector myself onto the approach. So that's the arrival briefing complete. The MSA you can see here in the bottom left, some high terrain around 4,900 to the north, of the Glasgow VOR. Something to bear in mind. So now let's have a quick look at the ILS approach, which you can see on the top left. It's the ILS approach for runway 23. We'll just check we've got the frequency set correctly. So we have, getting used to these controls here, 110.1 set twice for the ILS, and the inbound course is 230 set on the MCP. Now there's a slight discrepancy with the chart and the FMC of 3 degrees. If you put the correct course on the chart here, it should work, so 230. In reality, it should be the same, but bear that in mind. It's fine for a desktop simulator. Aerodrome elevation, we have 26 feet, we've got 50 in the land altitude, and the minimums for the approach is 221 feet. Well, that's something I forgot to set, so we'll do that now. And what I do like is, just like in the real aircraft in the ZIBO mod, you can set this really quickly. I'm just holding it down. 221. Just click on there. There we go. So now we have the minimum set. Now, as I said, after that LANAK approach, we'll do the vectors onto this approach. So all I've done is, after LANAK, is route direct to the first waypoint on the ILS approach, which is the Foxtrot 23, and I've got the platform altitude at 2,900 feet. We'll then descend to the ILS and then disconnect the automatics and then land. Now, regarding the missed approach, quite simply, climb straight ahead to 2,500 feet, and then we'll make a left turn, climb to 3,000 feet back to the NDB 331. Now, that feature, we don't have an ADF fitted to this aircraft, so it's fine. We'll just use heading select, and I'll just vector myself onto another ILS approach. It's probably what we get in real life. Now, fuel-wise, reckon we'll be burning around another ton or so, so I've updated the gross weight accordingly, landing around 59.3 tons. I'm planning for flat 30. I've selected order brake 2 for the stopping performance. You can see that set there. And just to show you what it shows on the Boeing OPT app, I put all the live weather information in, and you can see here for flat 30, order brake 2 at 59.5 tons, a bit more conservative in case we have burnt a little bit of extra fuel. Order brake 2 is 1890 meters. Now, if we look at the aerodrome chart for Glasgow, you can see here the runway length is 2,600 meters. Now, I'm going to plan on disengaging the auto brake early, braking manually, and what we'll do, we'll vacate the first rapid exit taxiway at Delta, and then we're going to taxi from Delta onto Golf and then stand 32 on November, which is the part of the international pier in Glasgow. Alright, that's the approach briefing complete. We now do the descent checklist, so we just verify the pressurization panel, we have the land altitude set, anti-ice is currently off and not required, approach briefing and fuel is discussed, and IS and altitude bugs, we've got the minimums of 221 set, and the flat 30 VRF and 142 set as well. So the descent checklist is complete. Right, what I'll do, I'll meet you just before top of descent as we fly into Glasgow. Okay, so we're just approaching top of descent. You can see the FMC says reset MCP altitude, and VNAV's already slowing down to the descent phase speed, which is going to be, well, 270 knots, but it's actually bugged that speed now in preparation for that. So I'll imagine we've been cleared down to flight level 160, which I'll now set. 160 is checked, and all we need to do is push out into vent. Now, if you push out into vent, the aircraft will now descend at 1,000 feet per minute until it captures its vertical profile. It will stay in VNAV path the entire time. Once you're on the vertical profile, FMC speed should change to retard and then arm, and it then should plan an idle thrust descent. Okay, so the next waypoint's on the arrival chart, if you remember. We're going to be flying from Inipi to Odighi, maximum flight level 200 at Odighi. So we can see here, legs page, Odighi, yeah, easily going to do that. It says 173 here. So that's it. We'll just monitor the vertical profile as we capture VNAV. So we're now stabilised in the descent, nothing's changed, still in VNAV. Now, unlike what I'm used to, it's still in FMC speed. All that means is the auto throttle will manipulate the thrust to ensure that we maintain 270 knots. Should usually be in retard and then arm, allowing you to do an idle thrust descent. But nonetheless, we're on the vertical profile, just maintaining the speed, so I'm not too bothered. Now, imagine we'd be descended further to flight level 70. That's the restriction at LANAK, if you remember. And that is now set, so 70 is checked. And the next thing that's going to happen is passing flight level 150. We'll simply select the seatbelt signs to 1. Okay, so all I've done is put the seatbelt sign on at flight level 150, still descending in VNAV. If we have a look at the FMC and the ND carefully, you can see we're approaching this decel point. Well, that's because the aircraft wants to decelerate from 270 knots to 250 knots at Papa Foxtrot Sierra 30. So watch what happens as soon as we pass the decel point. Beauty with VNAV is it'll then pitch for the new speed. It should usually plan doing this with idle thrust, but it's still got FMC speed. I think it's trying to compensate for this very strong headwind there. So here comes the decel point. I'm going to go from 270 knots down to 250 very shortly. There we go, 250 knots. The aircraft's going to pitch up, and now it's gone to arm. It should stay there unless it needs to add thrust if we get low on speed. Okay, so now the aircraft's descending at its target speed of 240 knots as we approach below flight level 100 in my cost index. We can get the post-cruise checks done as we pass flight level 100. So, fuel, 4 pumps, we'll put the fixed landing lights on, turn off lights, and we'll do the retracts and taxi after the landing clearance. APU is off, pressurization, let's have a look at the overhead panel carefully. That is all set and looking good. Seatbelts we verify on, the angle of bank is set, push recall, and we then do a PA to the cabin crew to say we have 10 minutes to landing. Now at this point we'd probably get handed over from Scottish radar to Glasgow approach as we approach LANAK. Well, imagine that we've done that. We're now under radar vectors for the ILS approach, and they've said flight deck to sim, turn right heading 335 degrees, and you're on vectors for the ILS approach runway 23, maintain flight level 70. So all we'll do, we'll push heading select, and I'm just going to vector myself onto the ILS approach from this point here. Okay, so we're still on this heading of 335 degrees. We're nearly at beam LANAK at flight level 70 as per the restriction. Well, now we've been, imagine we've been cleared to an altitude of 3,000 feet, which is now set. And we're just going to leave it in VNAV, because if you're following the magenta line roughly like we are there, it should give us a decent descent profile and a continuous descent. So now we're descending to 3,000 feet. We can set the local QNH. It's just changed. Looking at the latest weather, it's 998. We'll set that now. Oops, if I remember how to. Oh crikey, this is fiddly. There we go. So QNH 998 is set. We're passing 6,500. I'm just going to go VS. The aircraft's not descending for some reason. We'll just go VS there. Nice gentle descent at 400 feet per minute. Just confirm the passing altitude 6,400 for altitude 3,000 feet. We've got no flags. Standby altimeter set. Now the reason VNAV leveled off is because it's slightly below the profile. Now we want to try and maintain a continuous descent for the entire approach. So I've selected VS 400 feet. So now we're on the QNH of 998. We'll just do the approach checklist. Prior to that, we'll just check we've got the correct frequency. So 1101 for the ILS. We don't have the range rings set up for the ZIBO mod. That's absolutely fine. And the identification for the ILS, again, that's not appearing yet. So we'll look at that later. And then we just verify we've got the final approach course for the ILS tuned, which is 230. We could then do the approach checklist. I don't think I can arm the approach with this version here. Alright, so we're descending nicely. All I'm doing is monitoring the vertical speed, maintaining a continuous descent. What I'm going to do now is just update the FMC. And how do you do that? Well, if you simply select the active waypoint to the top and then click execute, you'll update the FMC, and it's showing, look, we're slightly high there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select level change, and that will allow us to then go idle thrust and then pitch for the speed of 240 knots. And as we approach the decel points, we'll bug the upspeed. We want to have around 180 knots on base leg from this point onwards. So looks like we're approaching some cloud here. We'll pop the engine anti-ice on as the TAT is below 10 degrees Celsius, 6. So start switches to continuous, engine anti-ice on, and we have the thermal anti-ice indication there nicely. So the vertical profile's coming nicely. I'm now going to bug the upspeed as we approach the decel point. The decel point here on the ND is where VNAV would typically bug your 210 knots or your upspeed here, as we would be on the vertical profile. But because I'm under vectors and I'm now manipulating the descent myself, I've selected level change. So bugging up nicely. We haven't quite leveled off. In reality, it should give you a very shallow descent. Now, because I don't want to level off, I'm just going to go back to VS and manipulate that descent myself. Now here's a good point to select flap 1. We're on base leg, so speed checked. Select flaps 1. We'll match the flap 1 speed. And now I can increase the rate of descent to around 1,000 feet per minute, just to ensure that we're nice and stabilised by 3,000 feet. I might go straight to flap 5 actually. So speed checked, flap 5, so long as you're below 250 knots, that's fine. And we'll just boggle 180 knots. And what we have to try and do, because it's very difficult in this aeroplane to go down and slow down in, is manage the descent, also manage the speed as well. So we need to descend and keep the speed under control. But things are looking nice. The speed's coming back nice and slowly, 1,000 feet per minute. We're maintaining a CDA. Well, imagine we'd be given a heading for base leg now, so we'll say we'll be turned left on a heading of 315 degrees. And we're just maintaining this descent now nicely. The vertical profile is looking good, speed's looking good. I'm just going to pitch now for 700 feet per minute, try and get the speed to below 200 knots within 10 miles. That's what we're aiming to do here. ILS is alive now, and it's looking sensible for where we want to be. By the time we turn final, we want to be bang on the localizer and bang on the glide path. It's all looking good. 12 miles. This would be a typical vector onto the ILS. Well, imagine we're given the final vector, so we'll go on a heading of around 275 degrees. Well, imagine we've been cleared for the ILS approach as well. So we can go heading 275. We'll imagine the cabin's secure. And heck, we'll even imagine we've been cleared to land, so we'll pop all the lights on as well, so I don't forget to do that later. Good, so we've been cleared the ILS approach. If we're on the glide path, there's no problem arming approach straight away. And that way we'll try and penetrate both the glide path and the localizer at the same time. And notice, since leaving flight level 70, we haven't levelled off once. We've managed a continuous descent all the way onto the approach. So a little bit high on speed here, so what I'm going to do is just use a little bit of speed brake there. To speed brake to flight detent. And it's a lot more effective in the ZIBO mod than it is in real life, and in reality all it does is make the aeroplane shake around a little bit, but it's actually quite effective here. So there we go, there's the localizer, there's the glide path, there we go, localizer and glide slope capture. So we can now set the runway heading to 230 degrees, and the missed approach altitude 3,000 feet is set, and we can also stow the speed brake. Okay, so we're nicely established on the ILS, as I just said. Speed's looking good, 180 knots. We'll just keep an eye on that. We can go to flap 10 if we need to control the speed. And seeing that it's already increasing, I'll go to flap 10 now. Now, flap 10 is really useful on an ILS if flap 5 is not maintaining your speed. It just allows that extra bit of drag to get you back to the flap 5 speed, which is the same as the flap 10. And we'll just keep an eye on that. If we need to use speed brake, we'll pop the gear down early. We'll do that already. Now typically we turn the window wipers on approaching minimums, but because I'm on my own, I'm actually going to turn them on now to ensure that I can see out the runway. And just getting the latest weather in Glasgow is still very similar. Winds around 250, gusting around 18 to 25 knots, so it's pretty much down the runway, so we'll see how we get on. Now the speed's still a little bit high there, so what I'm going to do is use a little bit more speed brake just to get the speed under control. It's absolutely fine. So long as you don't have the speed brake after flap 15 and the gear down is selected, that's fine. But flap 10 speed brake is the kind of the most drag you can have on the ILS before selecting gear down flap 15. So speed's coming back nicely. And what we'll do as soon as we approach the flap 5 speed, as soon as the thrust goes off from idle increases again, we'll stow the speed brake. Approaching 6 miles there. Just keep that drag going. That's looking good there. So what we'll do, we'll stow the speed brake, and because we're in IMC, we'd usually configure at 5 miles, but we'll do it now because I'm on my own. So gear down, flap 15, match the speed, and we'll do the landing checks to flap. So start switches are continuous, recall checked, speed brake, we have armed green lights, landing gear. Comes. Select the landing flap now as we wait for the gear, so flap 30, match speed, and we'll give ourselves a decent approach speed correction because of that wind. So gear down 3 greens, auto brake 2 set, flaps we have 30 required, 30 selected, green light. The landing lights are on, we have been cleared to land. So let myself get into a decent seating position. Looks like I can see the approach lights ahead. And we'll get stabilised, and I'll probably disconnect a little bit closer to minimums here. Just looking at the latest weather at the moment in Glasgow. So I've got live weather on. Yeah, 250 at 18 gusting 25, so that looks pretty realistic to that. So in and out the cloud, lost the approach lights again, that's fine. So long as we're fully stabilised and visual, we can see the approach lights at minimums, we can continue the approach. So from this point onwards, we're just monitoring to make sure that everything is stable. We're on the localizer, we're on the guide path, the approach speed is suitable. The checklist must be completed by 500 feet up to the point at which landing clearance is given. We can be cleared to land as low as 50 feet at that point. It hadn't been cleared to land, we'd obviously fly the missed approach. So, top of the amber bar, that's all stabilised, we're all good. So 500 continue would be the call by pilot monitoring. Now what we're going to do now, let's see how we get on. We're going to disconnect and fly manually, so wish me luck. So that's the autopilot, and oops, auto throttle is now off. Oops, now following the flight director slightly, don't want to do a dirty dive, that's because I'm also quite trim. Back onto the pappies, there we go. Keep descending. Whoop, now I'm a little bit high. Oh, I'm still getting used to this. There we go. Speed's back under control. Minimums, we can call continue. Watching the rate of descent there. Over the threshold around 50 feet. Check. Close the thrust levers. Very firm. Boom. There we go. We've landed. That would have been very firm. Well, a little bit of rudder back onto the centre line. Select the reversers. Let's go for 75%. There we go. So 100 knots. 80 knots. Cancel the auto brake. 60 knots approaching there, so we can go to idle reverse, and as I said, we'll make the first exit here at Delta, and then we could taxi on the stand. So I did get a little bit destabilised after disconnecting there. I must apologise. As I said, this is probably the fourth ever approach I've done, so apologies for that. You know, I've tried practice to make it look a little bit better in real life. And if you didn't just notice that there was a taxi light which we just smashed as we taxied and vacated off at Delta. That wouldn't be there in real life. So the reversers are stowed. We can stow the speed brake now as well, and we'll just vacate here. I'll bring the aircraft to a stop and I'll clean up. As I said before, you know, it's just a multi-crew aircraft in real life, single pilot. It's quite difficult to go up on the overhead panel, do the switches whilst not actually getting off the taxiway on the grass. So we'll just pass the stop point here and bring the aircraft to a stop there. There we go. Cool. So the cleanup, typically the captain would be doing all the taxiing. You can see here the tiller's not fitted to the first officer's side, so he can't taxi. So the captain would turn off the weather radar, which isn't simulated here, and then retracts, and the landing lights are off. We'll put the wipers back to intermittent. It's only a light rain shower, and that's essentially all the captain would do. The first officer, if you remember rightly, if you watch my other tutorials, you'll already know, but he'll put the transponder to out off. Flaps select all the way to up. Trim to around 4 units nose up. That's set. Check the engine indications, leave those on, and hydraulics, sorry, check the quantity and pressure. Leave the engine indications on for the shutdown. Flight directors can come off. Set that to altitude plus 100 feet. Set the MCP speed bug to 100 knots. Start switches. We'll leave the... well, we can turn the engine anti-ice off. I was about to turn the engines down shortly. We'd usually leave it on in icing conditions. Strobes are steady and the probes off as well. So that would be the clean-up flow. We then get the taxi instructions. So here you can see that the taxi chart will continue on Delta and then Golf November, and then we'll park on stand 32. So just parking into the November International Pier, so we'll pop the APU now on. Hopefully they'll all be started by the time we get onto stand. And just following the taxiway line, if I look out the left window, you should see where stand 32 would be. You can see there's a bridge, and the ground crew would be there too. So we'll start a nice gentle turn now. And in reality, we can only taxi onto stand if we either have the gate guidance or a marshal. If there's no one there, we have to wait until we get some guidance on there to show us when we can stop, and also to ensure that we're on the correct line. So coming from this position here, we turn the turn off and taxi lights off so we don't blind any of the ground crew, and as best as I can just onto the yellow line. There we go, that will do nicely. It's probably not exactly on the yellow line, but I'm not too fussed either way. Okie dokie, so we'll bring the aircraft to a stop there, set the parking brake, there we go, just verify that the wipers are off too, don't need those on anymore. Look at that for timing, AP is available, pop that on the bus, so 2 blues, 1 red, engines are dead, and all I'm going to do is the transit shutdown float, so all we have to do is put the isolation valve to open, verify we have the transponder set to standby. Usually be done by the first officer taxiing on to stand, but I'll do that now. And all we then have to wait for is the N2 to be below 20%, and we simply turn the anti-collision light off. Okay, the only thing which I forgot to do, which I've done now, I put the GPU on the bus, so the APU is off, and the fasten belts and no smoking switches to off as well. That way the passengers can actually get off and enjoy the sights, smells and sounds of Glasgow. Anyway, that's the end of this tutorial. That was a full flight from Liverpool to Glasgow using my company's operating procedures. I hope you found that interesting and learned something new. I will be using X-Plane 11 and ZIBO mod in a few more tutorials in the future, but I of course will still be using the PMDG NGX as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe, fly safe, and I'll see you for another Flight Deck 2 Sim tutorial in the very near future. Take care and bye bye.